For me, one of the most marvelous and wonderful and great things about chess is the combination. I mean, I just love this idea that I could sacrifice my queen, the most powerful piece on the board, so that I could smother mate my opponent. Oh, it's just poetry. Love the combination. And there's tons and tons and tons of combinations. So the only way I could possibly try to understand if there's millions, billions, trillions of combinations, I couldn't possibly know them all or keep them all in my head. So I had to make shortcuts. And the shortcuts I made for myself was I classified that there were 3 types of combinations. The first and the most obvious is the checkmating combination. The checkmating combination is the easiest combination in chess because guess what? You don't have to count how much stuff you sacrificed. At the end of the day, if you're giving checkmate, you could give away everybody except for that pawn that makes the checkmate. So the checkmating combination is the easiest combination to understand. The second type of combination is the combination to win material. Okay, so black comes down with his queen on b6, captures his pawn on b2, and I trap the queen, and I win the queen. So I do a forced sequence of moves. I sacrifice a pawn, that's my bait. The guy swallows the bait. Now I get to trap the queen, but it costs me 2 rooks and a pawn. Maybe that's not the best combination I ever made. I was supposed to win material, I lost material. But if I trap the queen for a rook and a pawn, well, that combination is a very good one. So the second type of combination is what I called the material combination. The goal of the combination was to win material. The third type of combination is the most difficult. It's called the strategic combination. Now, what's all that about? So the idea in this, the strategic combination, is I might sacrifice, I am sacrificing for a specific type of a goal. It might be to make my opponent's king vulnerable. It might be to create a fortress. It might be to sacrifice an exchange which would open up the position for my pieces. So the strategic combination was the most difficult, and in my notebooks, like whenever I ran across a strategic combination, man, I pasted that puppy right in there. I was really, really happy, and I thought in terms that my knowledge is growing because I have the strategic combination. So today we're going to talk about strategic class, a strategic class. Okay. So what is that about? Well, combination is actually easy. A strategic idea, there's just so many strategic ideas. It's, again, you got to use shortcuts. You got to use shortcuts with your strategic ideas. And I started to use my own, kind of classification system. Okay, so that's the backdrop to what I'm about to present. How many of you play 1d4? Thank God. Okay, so we're going to do a different strategic class. D4, 1d4. Excellent, excellent move. Really, and one of my favorites. I originally started with e4, switched to d4, switched to c4, and switched back to d4. So I like d4. Okay, so here is a strategic conundrum for those of you who play d4. I'm a confounding sort of fellow. I mean, I play the devil's advocate, so to speak, and I will play the move d7, d6. And I will say to you, it's your turn. It's simply your turn. I play d6. I don't reveal anything after I play d6. I may play a King's Indian defense with knight f6 and g6. I may play a Leningrad Dutch with f5. I may try to switch the game to a Benoni with c5, or what I'm about to show. So in this position, for those of you who play 1d4, how many of you would play c4? c4. Does anybody play chess in this room? You do understand this is a chess class, right? Okay. So nobody plays e4. Everybody plays d4. And after the first move, you don't play c4. Okay. So, okay. After the move d6, white essentially has a choice of 3 moves. If there are more than 3 moves, please let me know. Choice number 1 is to play e4. Now you're in an e4 opening. For those of you who play d4, you may not want to be in a perk defense. But this is certainly your first choice, and probably your best move. Your second choice is to play c4. You're a queen pawn opening. You expand on the queen side. And your third choice is knight f3. Does anybody have another choice? What's another choice? Yes, in the back.
D5.
Pardon?
D5.
D5. Well, this move would basically cost you a tempo. After the move d5, you're not really attacking anything, so that would allow me to implement c6 or the choice I'm about to show you. So this is a strategic class, an idea of how to handle a black strategy in this particular case. So this is about one of the most basic positions you can have if you're a d4 player. If you play 1d4, this got to appear on your radar, in your chess experience, in your chess knowledge, c4. Because when you play d4, you're usually trying 9 times out of 10 to play c4. Okay, so now what I did and have done and have played virtually my whole career is the move e7, e5. Okay. So now this is a strategic battle, a strategic idea for black. What I'm trying to do with black is I accept the fact that you as white start the game and you have an advantage. So with this move, I am trying to neutralize your advantage by offering you a trade of queens. Okay. So imagine for yourselves, you are all playing the white pieces. How many of you would capture the pawn with d takes e5, d takes e5, d takes e5, and how many of you would trade queens? Not a single one. Nobody plays chess in this room. This is like, okay, 3 persons. The gentleman a moment ago had offered the move d5. In this position, the move d5 makes more sense than it did a moment ago, but I still believe that after the move d5, black has won not equality, but an advantage. I already like black's position after the move d5. Why? Because you've wasted a tempo. Simply put, after the move f7, f5, let's just take a look. I have 1, 2, 3 in play. You have 1, 2. This pawn, 2. This pawn, 2. You control 4. I control 4. But in my mind's eye, I can see that once I play knight f6, bishop e7, castles, I've got this control of the center. My pawns are going to be very dynamic. The likelihood is you're going to be castling short. In other words, when you've played the move d5, it's very less likely that you're going that way. when your king's going that way, guess what? I'm going to have a welcoming committee for your king. Okay? So after the move e5, again, this is a strategic class. So the strategy that we're trying to understand for this class is a little bit awkward. I strongly believe, I think it's a very, very good idea for you to castle. I think castling is really good. That when you castle, not only do you usually, we hope, bring your king into safety, but you manage to bring a rook that's sitting in the corner, completely unemployed, doing nothing, into play. When you have captured queens, traded queens, you have cost black the right to castle. You've robbed him of a very important right, and the king also sits vulnerable on the open file, and it encourages, a rook is going to come to an open file anyway. That's because open files are magnets for our rook. We want our rooks on open file. If our king is sitting on the end of the open file, it obviously is going to get the attention of the rook. So, having said all of that, I'll just take a poll. Since none of you play chess, I'll take a poll. How many of you like white's position? How many of you like black's position? So it's even Steven. Perfect. And that's the way I wanted to explain backwards, going backwards into this concept. You're white, you have the opening move, you have the advantage. I'm trying to neutralize your advantage. So, as you've indicated in the poll, most of you think that black has done that. But why? Why? Why should black have equalized at all? He's put his king on an open file. He's lost the right to castle. So why isn't white simply better after, let's just say, the move knight c3? I'm going to develop. Okay? I develop my knight. So what should black now be doing? c7, c6. This is a very good move. So what's the idea behind this move? And again, this whole class is about strategy and strategizing and trying to understand the battle of ideas, because that's what strategy is to me. So with this move c7, c6, black applauds, gives himself a big, big pat on the back, because he thinks and sees that this move really fits into the position. On the one hand, when I brought my knight to c3, there was a consideration that this knight could potentially jump to these two squares. So with the move c6, you're trying to contain the knight, which is excellent. Deeper point, this move has a second point. The deeper point is black is going to, envision, pardon me, that there's going to be a mighty rook check on the D line, and so black is trying to construct a cave for his king. He imagines that once the rook comes with check, the king will go to c7, and it will be safe. So the move c7, c6 is an excellent move. Now, the switch flips. Now we've got to imagine what white is thinking. White is thinking that he really liked to develop his army quickly as he could, but he envisions that, for example, bishop g5 check, f6, castles check. What could be sweeter? Two checks in a row. We're on a roll, and the music stops. The bishop on g5 is under attack. The bishop on g5 will have to move. And I don't see any particular reason why white should be happy about this position. So we're going to go back and we're going to applaud black for his move c7, c6. And we're going to take it a little bit deeper and say, okay, I know you want to bring your king to c7. How on earth can I disturb that plan? How could I do that? Anybody have a suggestion? Exactly. F4. Brilliant. Now again, this is the battle of ideas, strategic ideas. This is what the class is all about. Now, in my mind's eye, let's say I'm playing the white pieces. I'm really hoping that you will capture my pawn. When you capture my pawn, the first thing that is happening after you capture my pawn is you're moving a unit that's already moved for the second time and helping me develop. So I've just gone 1, 2, 3. You've gone 1, 2. A moment ago, it was 1, 2, 3, 1, 2 in your favor. That's flipped. Thank you for trading pawns. That's the first thing. The second thing that's going on in my mind, I'm white, is that after I have castled, I'll put you in check, and your king will not have sanctuary on the c7 square. I beg your pardon. Okay, this is all really, really wonderful. This is great stuff. I love this. Okay, so, you know, Bobby Fischer famously said, to get squares, you got to give them. I've done something. I've made the strategic operation to rob you of a good square for your king, but it's come at a cost, right? My structure isn't as good as it once was. In fact, I now have an isolated pawn, and I have 1 island, 2, 3 islands versus 2. So for the sake of fast development, I have sacrificed pawn structure, but I've done it for a very specific purpose. I want to attack your king. Does black have a good move here? What move should black play? Should we? Pardon? Black have a good move here? Can. Well, let's imagine that black develops his bishop. Bishop to e6. We've always been wanting to do this ever since the black king has appeared on the d file. We're going to castle a check. The knight comes to d7. And now, white to move. White to move. Okay, white to move. So, first of all, we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we pat ourselves on the back if we're white because we have an edge in development. When we have an edge in development, it's really vital, it's incumbent upon us that we maintain that edge and that we continue in hyper-aggressive mode. We've got to punish black for his sins of losing the right to castle. So let's imagine moves that could punish black for a moment. One move, we notice that we are leaving this, that we are not leaving, but rather that this bishop on e6 attacks this pawn on c4. So one move that definitely grabs our attention is the move knight f3. Because in our mind's eye, we think that this pawn is no longer vulnerable. I could do a little combination, and I could end up with bishop and knight versus rook and pawn. That's one option, and I think this option favors white very much. A second option is I could jump with my knight to e5 with a double attack. I'm threatening pardon me, escape, didn't do that right. I'm threatening this bishop over here, oops, and I'm threatening to play rook takes d7 down here. If that precipitated the retreat, pardon me, bishop e6, well, I have another combination. Yes, young man. Correctamundo. Brilliant. Rook takes d7, bishop takes d7, knight, whoops, stop that. Knight takes f7 check, king here, knight takes. Now, although this knight in the corner is trapped, the reality is it's going to take you a few moves to capture it. I'll probably end up getting a pawn for it as well. But this position is what white wanted. What white wanted to achieve, he has. He's managed to break open the position. When you're behind in development, one of the worst things you can do is if you're tempted by a pawn. You're tempted to grab a pawn. Don't grab the pawn because it will increase your opponent's development. So we go knight f3. Okay. Now with this move, knight f3, we're offering as bait this pawn on c4. But we have other ideas for white here as well. Other ideas include the move knight g5. So let's make a move for black, pardon me. Let's make a move for black. Let's play a move like knight f6, for example. Knight to g5, attacking the bishop. Now let's say black says, okay, I'm ready to take your pawn. Bishop takes c4, e4. Again, you know, the battle of ideas. If it's my turn, I want to take your bishop. If you're not looking, if you're not careful, I want to take your pawn on f7, forking your king and rook. And also, I have ideas of e5 and e6 in the position. So for example, let's just continue the line with moves like bishop takes f1, rook takes f1. Let's say black moves his king, oops, that didn't work, moves his king to protect his pawn on f7. Well, again, when you're ahead in development, boom, 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 blast open the position. Play to open the position. That's the entire idea of being ahead in development, is to open up the position after a move, for example, like e5. Doesn't matter. Wherever this knight goes, we have one goal in mind, which is to blast open the position with e6. And let's just play a few moves further. Let's help black out for just a moment. So we give him a chance to enjoy his predicament. So at the end of this series of moves, white has basically developed his entire army. Black's king is essentially on open highway. Rooks are coming, and the two rooks haven't even gotten out of the corner yet. So this position obviously is really in white's favor. So we go back here for a moment. Here, here. What did we do? I thought we had this position. I thought we went knight. That was from knight c6. That was why we played the move knight d7. So knight c6 turns out to be a false trail, and we play knight d7. Now, in this position, it's kind of similar to some of the things that we were just looking at. How many of you would like to play f4 nonetheless? f4. One, maybe two, okay. So f4 is a consideration. So let's just take a look at the move f4 a second. So again, in basic strategies, in the openings, oftentimes you see this pawn tension. You see these captures. So you always have to be very reluctant, very, very reluctant to capture a piece or a pawn of your opponent that develops their pieces. So in other words, this move e5 takes f4, bishop takes f4, I don't want to play. On basic principles. On basic grounds that I'm helping my opponent develop when I play such a move. So I don't want to capture the pawn on f4. Maybe I'm forced to, but I don't want to do it. So I'm looking for other moves before I would do that. Then I say, oh my gosh, Yasser, be careful. The move f4, f5 threatens to trap the bishop. Is there any way that I can make a useful move that protects the threat? So yes, I can. I can play f7, f6, so I can step back with my bishop. And I leave it up to my opponent to decide. Now, my opponent, he's probably, I would imagine, thinking the same way as me, that I don't want to make a trade that is going to enhance my opponent's pieces. So in this particular position, imagine that white made this capture, and I recaptured with the knight. Now, a moment ago, that knight was on d7 bothering nobody. The next thing he got issued an invitation to come to the center of the board and put pressure upon my pawn. Well, if I were white, I wouldn't want to make that capture. If I were white, I would want to make the move knight f3. I'd want to make the move f5 a consideration. Probably those would be my two major moves. And now it's important. Now this is an important moment. Let's imagine my opponent plays the move bishop e3. Okay? So again, just a battle of ideas. Now this is important. A moment ago, I would never capture that pawn on f4 because it just helps white develop his bishop. Now that the bishop's already developed, that's one of the first things I look at. What a flip, huh? What a switch. A moment ago, it was with a tempo. Now suddenly it's a key consideration. Why? Because I'm reckoning that after I capture and he captures, I've isolated his pawns. I've got an e5 square. Wait a minute. I'm greedy. Hey man, I'm greedy. If for the line of reasoning I've just been mentioning, I don't capture on f4, how about the move bishop c5? Right? Doesn't that get our attention? Get our juices flowing? Like after bishop c5, if he has forced a trade, the trade favors black. Oops, small problem. I haven't paid enough attention to my e5 pawn. So small problem. This would be the great move. This would be a move that I would really want to do. Trade bishops, bring my knight to a more powerful square. But as I am about to show, and I know I can do castles with check, that's good as well, is that this pawn on e5 is now vulnerable. If it forces me to play the move knight d7, I'd like to take back my entire move with bishop c5. Okay? So we're going to go f4, f6. Oops. That wasn't right. Right. Okay. So bishop e3. Okay. So idea number one. I first take a look at this. Pawn takes, bishop takes, and I try to figure out, is that a good move? Possibility number two, candidate number two. I really look at bishop c5. The line we just discovered, I find dismaying. It forces me away. Next possibility. How about knight to h6? Knight h6. Okay. So with the move knight h6, my thinking is that if I could play my knight to g4 with a tempo against the bishop, if the bishop were to drop back, I could then maybe play bishop c5, or I could then maybe take, and with my knight on g4, my knight on d7, I'd have a nice outpost on e5. Okay? See how these ideas of strategy come about. I start to think, if I play the move knight h6, my opponent could maybe inflict some damage on my pawn structure. He could maybe play the move f5, attacking my bishop. If my bishop were to drop back, I'd have to consider the consequences of bishop takes h6. Maybe I wouldn't like those consequences. Maybe I'd like to live with them. But if the idea of knight h6 was to come to g4 and to conquer the e5 square, there's another way of doing it. How about this? Remember a move that I would never have considered a moment ago? I now think of it as as a first choice. So now I play knight e7. Let's just say, just for argument's sake, we just move some pieces around. After castles, knight here, I start to think that, ooh, wouldn't it be nice to control the e5 square? I could also do it another way. I could, oops, that's not the move. I could take, there you are, take, and I could offer the bishop directly, bishop d6. So many of you might say, well, wait a minute, Yaz. If you allow white to trade bishops, that pawn on d6 could become very vulnerable. And that is true. But let's see how vulnerable it might be. So after bishop takes, pawn takes, let's imagine castles. And let's imagine king e7 defending the pawn, just for the moment. In my mind's eye, I can conceive that black's planning to play the move knight e5, attacking this pawn on c4. Once the knight comes to e5, I could always defend the pawn with knight f7. One of the moves that I would really appreciate white playing would be, for example, check. This, in my opinion, would be strategically a bad error, because it turns out my king's not vulnerable at all on e7. The e-file's been closed. One of the reasons that I really bring this up is this whole queen takes d8, king takes d8, who benefits the most, is because one of the most topical lines in chess today is the Berlin Wall. How many of you are familiar with the Berlin defense? Yay. Okay.
You mean the wall itself?
Yeah, the wall itself. I had a piece at one time, by the way. So Vladimir Kramnik almost single-handedly popularized the Berlin defense because he was able to wrest the title away from Garry Kasparov by playing the black side of this position. So literally, the players have nearly gone from opening to late middle game, early ending, with the trade of queens and with the trade of a minor piece. So in this position, wow, this is really, really, really different from the position we were analyzing a moment ago. Position we were analyzing a moment ago, there was no double pawn. Neither did black have two bishops. It seemed like there were lots of ways for black to block a potentially catastrophic check on the d-file. Now that d-file looks really wide open. And yet, for all of that, this position has become one of the most popular positions amongst the most dynamic players in the world, including Hikaru Nakamura, America's #1 player, Veselin Topalov, one of the most dynamic players Bulgaria has ever produced, world champion, and of course Magnus Carlsen has also played this defense. So in other words, you are seeing a lot of grandmasters are making this invitation to trade queens and to offer to lose the right to castle to do so as well. Now, this is a bizarre variation, the Berlin. It's very, very, very awkward. I think, well, white must be better, but I can tell you that a lot of players have hit hit a wall on this defense, including Garry Kasparov. Kasparov couldn't dent Kramnik's defenses. The funny thing about this Berlin is at one time after the move knight c3 was played, everybody played king e8 and just said, okay, I'm awaiting developments. Tell me, white, please, what you are going to do. Today, after the move knight c3, black does a whole lot of different stuff. One of the things he does, is to play bishop d7, and after, for example, a move like rook d1, black plays king c8. So the idea of king c8 is that he's making a home for his king over here on the queen side with b7, b6. So unlike our first variation, where black was playing the move c6, one tempo, bringing his king to c7, black is now making 1, 2, 3 to get a safe king. And yet still, people think that black's position is fine. It's a kind of a strange strategical question that I'm posing on you to answer. When is it good to trade queens?